So for those of you for whom this is the first Ash Wednesday, I'm like so excited. Ash Wednesday is like my favorite. Like Ash Wednesday and Good Friday, which are like the dark days of the church calendar. Boom! That's so good. Maybe I just give you a sign. You can do that periodically throughout the, like, for emphasis. So good. But this is just one of my favorite days of the church year, and Lent is really my favorite season of the church year. It's been noted how our culture, really dominates Christmas and Easter. Like, although we have like our practices as a faith community, what that looks like, but, our culture has like Santa and Easter Bunny, and, there's all the consumerism and the made-for-TV specials behind all of it. And oddly, nobody waits every year to watch the Ash Wednesday Peanut special, right? There's like, there are no doorbusters at 4 a.m. On Ash Wednesday. Nope, we get this one all to ourselves, which is pretty great. Our culture has no idea what to do with a day that celebrates the fact that we all sin and we are all going to die. Like, what do you do with that? So this is what Ash Wednesday is about. Ash Wednesday brings us face to face with our own mortality. We smudge ashes on our foreheads and say the words that are from Genesis 3. We say, remember that you are dust, and to dust you will return. And we stand firmly in this reality, like naming that we are going to die, that life is precious and finite. I invited one of our young adults, we were having lunch, I invited her to this service, saying, hey, you should come to Ash Wednesday. And she's like, oh, I hate Ash Wednesday. It's just like all about death. I was like, yeah. But right? I mean, isn't that kind of our response? Like, who wants to choose to sit in the reality of our death? Ash Wednesday is also a day where we name our sinfulness, sin. When was the last time that you used the word sin in a sentence in everyday conversation? I think for some of us, that might be part of our language. I think for a lot of us, it's not. But sin is a word that I think some of us bristle at, or we carry a lot of baggage around, and many of us don't really understand what it is when we say that word. And yet, I want to say that we do know sin. We know it in our lived experience in the world. We know it as the very real brokenness that exists in so many ways, our own kind of brokenness in our hearts and our bodies and our actions and our thoughts and our anxieties. We've known sin in the brokenness in our relationships and in our families. We know sin in the brokenness of the oppressive systems and cycles of hate and violence and poverty and oppression in our world. So we know sin, we see it, we observe it, we participate in it. One way that I've always found helpful, there's a lot of different ways to kind of define sin, but one way to understand that I found helpful is Martin Luther's definition of sin. Marty said that sin is being turned in on ourselves. The Latin, we were looking for the Latin for collar earlier, and I was like, I don't know. But I do know the Latin for incurvatus in se, is how you would say it, which is curved in on self. Incurvatus in se. And I just feel like that captures it. Essentially, it's saying that sin is perpetual navel-gazing. Like we're just stuck in ourselves, focused on selves, self-obsessed, all of our own ways of being self-centered and filled with pride and image and even self-loathing, self-protection, stuck in ourselves. Like healthy self-awareness is a good thing, but it's none of that. But all the ways in which we can see, all we can see is ourselves instead of letting our gaze be drawn out to see the infinite God of the universe among us, drawn out to see the beauty of God and the beautiful complexity of others, just being drawn out of our brokenness. I find that helpful. So Ash Wednesday, then, is also our chance to freely name that we are sinful, broken, turned in on selves, people who hurt others, who hurt ourselves, who have fallen and failed, who feel broken, and who often feel overwhelmed by the brokenness that we see in our world. And throughout Scripture, there's such gift for us. There are words that capture all of this. People felt this way then too. And particularly in the Psalms, where people cry out to God from that place of honesty and longing and angst and confession in the midst of their own turned in on selfness, recognizing their need for God for when we feel stuck too. So Psalm 51 is one of those places. And it's the psalm that is like read on Ash Wednesday. Like you read Psalm 51, like that's where you go. So we're going to actually read it together and have you read it with me out loud to let these words of honesty and confession, I'm going to have it on the screen, so you're going to be good. So we're going to read it out loud together. So just let these words of honesty, confession, become ours, yes, as we sit in sin and death together. I also, even as we own these words, I always love paying attention to who God is. Like, who do we pick up, the character of God as we also then use these words as our own. All right? You ready? Make sure I'm not blocking anyone. Okay. Here we go. Have mercy on me, O God, because of your unfailing love. Because of your great compassion, blot out the stain of my sins. Wash me clean from my guilt. Purify me from my sin. For I recognize my rebellion. It haunts me day and night. Against you and you alone have I sinned. I have done what is evil in your sight. You will be proved right in what you say, and your judgment against me is just. Create in me a clean heart, O God. Renew a loyal spirit within me. Do not banish me from your presence, and don't take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and make me willing to obey you. You do not desire a sacrifice, or I would offer one. You do not want a burnt offering. The sacrifice you desire is a broken spirit. You will not reject a broken and repentant heart, O God. So how do those words feel to speak them? Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Who wants to choose to sit in the reality of our own death and brokenness? And yet, this is what we do. Because what is a spiritual life? A spiritual path that avoids, that won't go deeply into pain and failure and insecurity and death and doubts and fear and anxiety. A spiritual life is one that not only doesn't avoid those things, but actually goes into them all the way to the center. And the way of Jesus is absolutely a life of going all the way in, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Part of that going to the center of who we are is captured in another reading that is traditionally read on Ash Wednesday. It's from Matthew 6, the middle of Jesus' greatest sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. So we're going to read this. I'll read it. But I want you to notice as we read, what topics that Jesus covers, and notice how for all of them he advises kind of the same response. So there's a bit to get through, but it's good, all right? So engage, imagine Jesus, Sermon on the Mount, biggest, greatest sermon of all, and this is part of what he has to say. So Jesus continued, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show they are fasting. Oh, truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So in this, the Sermon on the Mount, as Jesus talks of generosity and prayer and fasting and doing super cool spiritual things, what does he say about all of them? There's this refrain that's in there, and ultimately he's saying, don't do this for show, right? No audience. He's saying, pay attention to your intentions, the why we do what we do, that the things we do are not to be done for the sake of looking good, right? But what we do is done for God alone. What matters most to God is the state of our hearts, our intention, the why, our core, that who we are when no one is watching, who we really are. So who are you when no one's watching? Ash Wednesday and Lent beg this question of us as we get shaken down to the core of who we are. Who are you when no one is watching? Ash Wednesday opens us up to pay attention then to who we are and who we are becoming. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. For Ash Wednesday begins this 40-day journey to the cross. We're like marching on from here on out to death and to resurrection. Lent is about interrogative love. Love that gets all up in our business. It's about asking how beauty might occur in the midst of our fragile lives. It's about creating new stories for our lives, scribbled in dust and ash that re-examine what human beings can be for the life of each other and our world. It's messy business when we're dealing with ash. It's messy to let interrogative love into our lives, for the shadows and cobwebs and the deep sealed off places within us to be touched by the light of Christ. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And to open us up for this kind of journey that we are on together, marching on towards the cross. Here at Salt House, our particular path that we will walk together for these 6 weeks of Lent is one of prayer, of stepping into this vulnerable place of conversation and relationship with God, of letting that interrogative love into all the moments of our day. And to let God, through various practices of prayer, to help us to see who we are when no one's watching. So it's a journey that we'll walk to the cross together. And so our journey begins tonight. It begins now. In a moment, we will come forward to receive the imposition of ashes, is the way it's said, to impose them. And to prepare us for that holy time, we just have a song and a video. It's called Perfectly Fitted. And it uses Jesus' words of invitation from Matthew 10. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, burdened, and I will give you rest. And so we hear Jesus' invitation now into the honest frailty and beauty of our lives, into the vulnerability of Lent, into 40 days of prayer together.
Come to